with the 2026 budget, the federal government will no longer bear the sole burden of electricity subsidies as confirmed by the Budget Office of the Federation. Instead, the financial responsibility will be shared across the three tiers of governments, that's the federal, state, and local. And this implementation framework, as it's been reported that the President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has directed the use of existing electricity sector laws, primarily the Electricity Act 2023, to create a practical, transparent, and enforceable sharing framework. The government plans to deduct approximately 3.6 trillion naira from the Federation accounts between 2026 and 2028 to fund these subsidies, ensuring the cost is distributed according to the revenue sharing formula. The federal government will stop treating the subsidy as an open-ended federal liability. Any tier of government that chooses to maintain affordability interventions that subsidies for its residents, according to the federal government, must clearly identify and fund them. Well, there's a talk around the Power Consumer Assistance Fund called the PCAF, and subsidies will be managed through these defined mechanisms to ensure accountability and to prevent the build-up of market arrears. The reform, according to reports, is to incentivize all levels of leadership to promote cost-reflective tariffs, to improve sector stability and ensure targeted protection for vulnerable consumers rather than maintaining blanket price suppression. This move is expected to reshape the political economy of electricity in Nigeria, forcing states to either improve revenue collection or prioritize power sector investment. Well, we'll talk about this, and this would be the focus on Homo Politicus today. We're talking about the politics around the economy of electricity today. If you like, the politics of power, not power as per political power, but electricity generation, distribution, and indeed the economics around that today is what we're talking about. Welcome to Homo Politicus. Kingsley Bassey is my name. I'm joined right now by the Executive Director, NEPA Wahala NG, that's the maker Dite Ojoko, who's also an energy expert and lawyer, a legal practitioner. He joins me virtually for this conversation. Many thanks for joining me, the maker Dite Ojoko.
Thank you, Kingsley, for having me. My pleasure once again to be with you.
Appreciate that. Let's get down to the conversation, right? I'd like to know first your thoughts around this. There are lots and lots of talks around this deduction, this proposed deduction or shedding of the financial burden of electricity subsidies in the country. What do you say to this proposal of 3.6 trillion naira to be deducted beginning 2026 by the federal government from the federal allocation?
Okay, first of all, I would want to say that the reports have been somewhat exaggerated in terms of the fact that the deduction that we're talking about is supposed to span a period of 3 years. Okay, by the medium-term expenditure framework approved by the National Assembly in 2025, it's supposed to be about 1.2 trillion per annum for 2026, 2027, and 2028. Okay, so it's not something that's just going to happen at once, and it will still require approval by the National Assembly in this year's budget before the federal government makes that deduction from the Federation account before disbursement to the states. Now, this was always going to happen when the Constitution was amended and the Electricity Act was also passed to allow states to now make laws regarding the generation, transmission, and distribution of electricity. So with this decentralization of authority among the three tiers of governments also comes a measure of fiscal responsibility, right? All this while the federal government has been bearing the burden alone, okay, rather than sharing it among the states, because the federal government was solely responsible for generation, transmission, and distribution. But now that it's been devolved among the states, and states have been encouraged to pass laws regulating the electricity markets, then it also means that the states should also be responsible for bearing their share of the subsidy that the government currently pays on electricity. Now, this subsidy has been in place because right now the tariffs that we're paying for electricity um, do not match up with economic realities. If you look at the tariff indices, especially the exchange rates that we have pegged for those tariffs, you find that there's a fairly large disparity between the current exchange rates and the rate at which the current tariffs are being fixed. So while we have the Band A customers, which form about 10, 15, 20% of the customer base, paying what looks like a cost reflective tariff, the bulk of the customers do not pay that tariff, and then somebody has to bear that burden because debts have to be paid, right? The power has to be paid for. So the government has been shouldering all this while, or the federal government has been shouldering all this while, but now requires that the states bear a part of that burden. Now, you find that if you look at previous budget estimates, that the presidential metering initiative, right, was also funded directly, okay, from the FAC allocation before disbursement was made to the states. So you see the federal government deducted about 800 billion naira annually to fund that presidential metering initiative, which aims to bridge the metering gap, and which well, we're not talking now about whether or not that has succeeded, but that those deductions have been made for a few years now. Now, the petroleum subsidy as well, the fuel subsidy as well, right, also follow the same pattern, right, because the federal government did make those deductions, okay, before distributing FAC to the states. The proposal now is this: with dwindling revenue, right? And in order to have a more equitable distribution, since the states are now also making laws for their states, then the states should also bear a share of that subsidy, right? So deduct from source and then share among the states.
But Emeka, given the varying financial health, status of different states in the country, is it realistic though to expect poorer states? I mean, we know there are poorer states in the country, though. I mean, that's debatable whether they have the funds to do this or not, considering sometimes that residents and even Nigerians at large will tell you that some state government, just spend lavishly. But yeah, realistically, we have poorer states than some big, states. We know how much the likes of Lagos and Rivers and the rest contribute to, the federation account in terms of remittals. But again, back to my question, is it realistic to expect poorer states, to co-fund these subsidies without triggering new sub-national debt crisis or even defaulting on their obligations to the power sector?
Okay, now the way it's done, right, it's not done on an equal footing. That is the same amount you deducted from each state, right? For example, now, if the budget for 2026 is say 10 trillion, right? Now that 1.2, not the budget. Now, if the fact for 2022 is 10 trillion, right? What comes in, right? And then, so what the government does is basically you deduct that 1.2 trillion at source. So what's available for distribution according to the standard distribution formula, right, would be 8.8 trillion, right? So what you would see is a pro rata reduction in what comes to the state. So for a state like Lagos now, which has massive amounts of IGR, and maybe states like Rivers State that have those same statistics, right? Yes, they would see a reduction in what comes to them, right? The same way that the poorer states would see a reduction come to them, but it would not be the same amount taken from each state, right? It will be if a state like Nasarawa now gets in a month gets um, 30 million, for instance, from the federation account. Okay, what will be deducted would be the same percentage as what will be taken out from Lagos State. So it's not as if it's an equal for the same amount to be taken out from every state. It's a percentage, right, based on your statutory share of the federation revenue. So there would be some measure of fairness, right, so that all the states will see will be the normal thing that they usually see whenever there's a reduction in what comes to the federation account. You know, in times when we have a surge in oil prices and all that, that what comes in is more, and then when there's a lull, what comes in is less. So it will still be the same dynamic that plays out in all the states, whereby market forces see either an upward or downward review of what comes to you on a monthly basis.
Is that the most transparent sharing formula though, that would be appropriate for this, to be used for this? You know, should it not be total state consumption? Some would even say, should it not be economic capacity? I know I just heard very clearly what you just said. Some would say too, should it not be population? And does Nigeria currently possess the granular data needed to accurately bill states for the exact electricity that indigenous residents there consume? What formula will be the most transparent?
The most practical thing to do, because when we're talking about how this would work out in different states, look at the alternative. Let's assume that the government say, let's decentralize it completely so that the states do whatever they want to do with their tariffs. But the government takes their hand 100% of paying the subsidy and says, kick it to states. What would be alternative then? It means that for consumers in states like Lagos, where there's more efficiency in revenue collection by the discos, consumers in Lagos would pay less for power than consumers in, say, Jos, right, where there are more inefficiencies reported by Just Disco, right? So for more developed markets, you'd find that they would pay lesser tariffs than less developed markets. Okay, so that's the thing that the government has to balance here. Like, typically, the population in Lagos, they are wealthier and they should be able to afford higher tariffs. But because the supply business in Lagos is a bit more developed, the discos are a bit more efficient. You see some instances where Ikeja disco is reporting revenues that outstrip the amount of power supply in the month. That means they have a surplus, which now forces the tariffs down, because with reduced ATC and C collections, the tariffs are supposed to go down, right? So if you have that kind of decentralization, you would find that those states that you're talking about would actually pay more for power than the states that you could say can afford it.
Oh, well. Interesting perspectives, and this would generate even further conversations in terms of the sharing formula and which one is the most transparent. For some persons, this formula that you've just recommended might work. Maybe that's the best way to go. Some persons, maybe not. Well, the federal government, and let's look now at the hidden liability risk, because the federal government is seeking to stop the buildup of market arrears. But if a state, or say the local government, those tiers that the federal government is now saying should further bear the consequences. If the state or local government fails to pay its share of the subsidy, we know, that is going to be, deducted from source. But if there is some sort of controversy around this, who ultimately then bears the costs? That the consumer through a tariff hike, or the discourse, would that be the customers or the consumer through a tariff hike, or will it be the discourse that would have to go through this liquidity shortages that has been experienced for some discourse? If you get my question.
Well, you're saying that if one tier of government now is unable to pay for power supply to that particular segment of the population, right, who bears the shortfall, right? That's where this subsidy comes in, because the government is the one who mops up that difference, right?
From
and
source,
that's what
yes?
contributing to, yes, that's what is contributing to, right, to the inefficiency in the sector and to the increased poor performance of power distribution, right? When government is subsidizing power, it acts as a disincentive to the discos to improve their performance, right? To improve their revenue collection, to improve their power supply. Because hey, if all I need to do is just to receive and send, and whatever shortfalls I have, the government backs me up, then why should I bother to stress myself to put deploy meters, to do all the things that a normal commercial business should do to ensure that the gap between cost of services and income is reduced as greatly as possible. So that's the thing that this government needs to have to put in the right perspective. We see all the legacy debts that have accrued over the years. We have Gencos that owe literally trillions of naira. The government is looking at innovative ways now to see how to pick up those debts, right? The bond has been recently floated, right? And from what we hear, it's been oversubscribed. And then the proceeds of those of that energy bond is not supposed to go to defray part of those legacy debts. Now, the government does not want to continue incurring this debt. That's why I said, okay, from now, whatever comes into the federation account, we deduct at source so that there is zero subsidy on the part of not zero subsidy, but the federal government does not bear this burden anymore, right? It's shared equitably among all the tiers of government, and the discos continue operating. What it means now is this, because the principal revenue that comes into the preparation account comes from oil revenue and from other non-oil sources. So what comes in now goes out to ensure that the country is supplied with power and the players in the system don't go bankrupt and there's a total shutdown, right, in economic activity in the country.
Oh, well. So, we've got to move very quickly, pardon me, but one still wonders if this move will truly incentivize states to promote cost-reflective tariffs, pardon me, yes, and get them to further invest in their state-run power infrastructure, particularly under the legislation, that's the Electricity Act 2023. But will this even simply lead to political friction over this federation account deductions? Maybe states would now begin to have, some frictions. Local governments who have not been getting their funds directly, even though the central bank, the Supreme Court has ruled that they should be getting it, directly. Maybe they will too will now be frowning that what's happening to monies? Will this truly incentivize state and local government?
We watch out and see what happens. Okay, there's a possibility that some states may decide to challenge it, right? They may decide to challenge it in courts, and we'll see what the courts will say about it.
What does the law say really about this, though? I'm curious. Like, what does the law say? What does the Electricity Act 2023? What does it provide regarding this? Are there provisions around this?
There are no specific provisions that guide matters like this. This is a question now of fiscal economic policy, right? Which it is province of the federal government to develop and then for the assembly to approve. Now, the assembly, right, the budget office of the federation has come up with this medium-term expenditure framework, right, which has been approved by National Assembly. But the implementation of the policies there have to be done under a yearly budget. So these deductions were made under the 2025 budget, and the proposal is to make further deductions, but on an increased scale under the 2026, 2027, 2028 budgets at 1.2 trillion per annum. So the representatives of the people have approved that document. So barring any legal challenge, right, that 1.2 trillion will be part of the budget for 2026 that the NAS will approve and will be implemented. So if the states are objecting or the national or the local governments are objecting to it, then the only recourse will be by way of court action, right, to set aside whatever steps that the government may take in implementing that medium-term expenditure framework as it concerns deduction of the electricity subsidy from the federation account before, from the monthly fact before it gets to the state.
Emeka, I'd like to thank you so much for being a part of the conversation. I can't let you go without talking about this specific part of this conversation, which maybe for many Nigerians watching right now would watch later to via the social platforms, would be simple. What does this mean for the Nigerian electricity consumer who's still complaining? I mean, I was sharing with someone today who was saying, you know, that there's no way the federal government has been paying electricity subsidy with the amount she has been paying for electricity. She runs a business and she feels like that's way too much, you know, parting with some 500,000 naira per month for, you know, electricity. And she says, well, there is no way you're telling me I'm spending, or the federal government is subsidizing that rate, right? So what does this mean? What would this mean if this proposal, they pull through with this proposal, this gets approved, and state government, local government align or not align, but they start to implement this? What does this mean for the Nigerian consumer who's on the street, who's hoping for lesser tariffs going forward?
Well, what the first effect is this, that with the federal government sharing the subsidy with the state, it means that the federal government will have more income coming to it to invest in developmental projects, right? So that will be the first ripple effect on the state, that more resources are available to the federal government to do projects. Part of those projects, of course, will also include ensuring more efficiency in revenue collection within the electricity industry. So with improved revenue collection, then we may see more energy accountability. We may see more premises being metered, even though for what the person you spoke to talked about, who pays that kind of humongous bill, you may find that when more premises are metered, then there will be more migration of customers from the lower tariff bands to band A, right? As the power supply improves and as metering improves, the band B, C, D customers will be moved to higher bands, and you will witness more revenue accruing to the entire value chain. Discos make more, Gencos make more, and all that. So we hope that with improvement in revenue collection, that there will be improvement in services as well. Now, with improvement in services, it means that, well, the normal alternative power things that we normally do, those expenses go down, because frankly speaking, power supply is more expensive than generator supply. When you have public power supply, it's more efficient. So profitability of businesses, of the MSMEs, their profitability goes up. If the small scale businesses are doing better, there's a trickle down effect, presumably on the economy. That's what we hope to see. But the challenge with everything in this country is that policies that are very well formulated always suffer in the implementation. And I don't expect anything to happen differently with this. Unfortunately so, right? Because most of the people who are in charge of implementing these things, their first priority usually is self-interest. Okay, so when self-interest inserts itself into the process, then you now start seeing people trying to cut corners and doing all kinds of things to benefit themselves rather than benefit the system, and we all suffer for it. Okay, we pray that things may be different, but realistically, the past behavior is always a good predictor of future behavior. So no matter how well thought out this may be, right, except specific systems are put in place to ensure that self-interest does not unnecessarily interject in the process, in the implementation, then we may just find that these wonderful ideas that the government have come up with, right, may just end up having no effect, as we have seen over time.
Well, I got that last part where you said we pray that this works. I mean, we have to resort to praying too sometimes, don't we? So that policies that should, well, ordinarily experience smooth implementation, would just need to be sorted by prayers. But yes, legal practitioner, energy expert, and executive director NEPA Wala Naija, Emeka Detail Joko. Many thanks for joining me today to break down the story and indeed not just shed lights, but help Nigerians to understand what it means for them. Appreciate your being on the program.
Thank you. It's wonderful being here. I enjoyed my time with you.
Thank you so much. That's our politicals today. Yes, we've been talking about the politics around the electricity sector, and now more politics might be played at that level, considering this proposal by the federal government over 2 years, right, 2026 to 2028, to deduct 3.6 trillion naira from source. That's from the federation accounts. No longer will the federal government, they say they will no longer bear the sole responsibility of carrying that financial burden of paying your electricity subsidies. They want your state government, your local governments to take responsibility, to financial responsibility for this. You know what has been said about state government and even local governments getting more and more locations since 2023 when the fuel subsidy was removed. So yeah, time for them to show working, isn't it? Well, we'll keep monitoring development.